Well, good afternoon. My name is Roland Anglin, and I'm the Dean of the Levin College of Urban Affairs. Welcome to Trails and Greenways for Our Metropolitan Future. Now, you know that communities across the country are recognizing the value of trail and greenway development toward improving the quality of life for local citizens. I'm going to make a mea culpa. I am a CDC, a Community Development Corporation person. I spent 9 years at the Ford Foundation funding and supporting the work of CDCs. In about 1997, I was asked to see what else we could do to help the portfolio. And it was tough because at that point in our nation's history, we were trying to figure out how to balance off housing development and real community development. So I went on a search to figure out what we could do to support in the CDC industry to help embellish or enhance their work. And I came across this notion of trailways. And I didn't know what trailways were as an urban kid from Brooklyn, New York. But I got to talk to a number of individuals, a number of commissioners across the country, and I came away convinced that trailways and greenways were a helpmate to urban development, community development. So it's in that spirit that we wanted to have this forum here at Levin. But you in Northeast Ohio have been doing it for a long time. Over the past decade, the Northeast Ohio Trails and Greenways Conference has been held a biennial event attended by hundreds of planners, community officials, and interested citizens, all to learn about the challenges and progress in trail development. This is an off year for that conference, and we're proud to continue the momentum that that conference has had by holding this forum. I can tell you that as Dean, and I've told Jim Kostelik this, I want to bring this topic more centrally to the college. So this is the first of what I hope to be many examinations of the ways trailways and greenways can be helpful to community and economic development. So Jim, thanks for organizing this, and I think the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Dean. So, let me see if I can get this. So, I want to try to tell you a little bit about people that want to know why are we so slow in building these trails. It is really amazing when you think about the future of the trails in terms of how they're actually being developed throughout this community. It's taken a long time to get to where we are today, but thanks to a lot of the people that are sitting here on the dais, we are really happy to see so much progress being made in the last several years. Trails are terrific for a number of reasons. One is they encourage physical fitness and healthy lifestyles. They facilitate walkable communities by providing safe alternative access between neighborhoods, parks, schools, local shopping, and employment centers. They also help make communities better places to live by preserving and creating open spaces and wildlife habitat. Protect and enhance stream corridors and other natural areas to help mitigate stormwater, which is a big issue locally. And finally, they strengthen local communities by increasing property values and provide amenities which help attract potential homeowners and businesses. Because a lot of the communities around the country that are considered to be very walkable and livable communities are the ones that are really attracting a lot of professionals, young professionals, who look for this kind of lifestyle. I know I've been teaching here for several years, and I am surprised how many students I have had that don't even have cars. And it's amazing to me, so many rely on bikes and public transit to get around. Yeah. Oh, Rob. Oh, boy. Come on down, Rob. So one of the things, trails are amazing, is that the towpath trail, which is the kind of the spine of the entire group of trails that are being built throughout the area, the towpath trail has taken about 20 years to come to downtown Cleveland. And so when you look at that time frame, it is amazing to see how quickly some portions have been done and others have taken a lot longer because of the tremendous amount of work that has gone into them. So fortunately, we are seeing a lot of trails that are now spiking off in different directions from the towpath trail. So we're very pleased that so many community groups have come together to try to make this happen and connect the neighborhoods directly into the towpath. Still waiting. Okay. Okay, so fortunately we are at this point looking at how we can actually improve the system by adding to it throughout the community. Coming up. Okay. So the towpath trail in Cuyahoga County, particularly the last 5 miles, have been very difficult. Here you can see that many of the sections are either completed or are being constructed right now. So the towpath idea was simply to use the former Ohio and Erie Canal towpath trail, which you see here on the top part of your screen, where the mules and the donkeys and so on, the horses, pulled the barges along, and use that particular trail to create this towpath trail that went through it. I think most of this was the idea, the brainchild of John Debo, the former superintendent of the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. So there's a lot of obstacles as we get further north. One is that this is a floodplain, so that in itself is an obstacle, and certainly when it rains and have flooding, snow melt, the same part of the trail has to be cleaned off and washed up, and then we wind up having the trail back, but it can be closed down for a significant period of time. Another obstacle is the interstate highway. Certainly the freeway that's been redeveloped over the last couple of years included this section of the towpath coming northward. And you can see a lot of the erosion that has occurred, retaining walls need to be rebuilt. It's a very complicated issue. And so we have to see over time how we can do that. We regrade the bluff. We need to find a way to snake the trail through the valley, coming down into the valley from the upper reaches of Tremont. We also have a lot of challenges outside the towpath, which include going over wetlands, over creeks. We have this particular couple sets of bridges going over Scranton Road and over the railroad tracks. And we have on the towpath further south in Valley View, a couple of beautiful bridges that span Brook Park and also Warner Roads. We also snake trails through trees. When we can't do that, we wind up having to warn people to watch where they're going so they don't hit a tree. We snake them through various corridors of utilities. And we take rail in the lower corner here, we see the Morgana Run Trail, which was a former rail line. So Rails to Trails project here in Cleveland. We like to make trails as wide as possible to accommodate as many people as possible, as many types of users, but sometimes that isn't possible. Here in Cleveland, part of the towpath goes between the railroad tracks and back of Steelyard Commons, so we only have 10 feet or so to work with. In downtown Cleveland, as you approach, we did a trail along Burke Lakefront Airport, and unfortunately, in some cases, the utilities were right in the middle of it. And finally, a lot of opposition in many cases, including a lot of suburban trails where people fear trails because they think people are going to come on my backyard and steal TVs. And we heard that so many times. And actually what I try to tell people is somebody stealing a TV on a bike, they don't have to use a trail, they can use the sidewalk. So today we have a panel that is going to kind of bring you up to date on some of the things that have been done recently. We have Michael Mears from the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission, senior planner, who will talk about some of the major projects that are going on in an overall big fashion. We have Freddie Collier, the director of the City Cleveland Planning Commission. We have Brian Zimmerman at the end here, the chief executive officer for Cleveland Metro Parks. Michelle Johnson, who is the director of community and planning design for the Environmental Design Group, and Derek Schaefer, executive director of the West Creek Conservancy. So all of them are going to give about a 15 to 20-minute presentation, and then we'll go from there and have questions come up. So when you do have questions, you need to come up to the microphone because this is being recorded. Okay, so Mike. Use this.
All right, thanks, Jim. And thank you, everybody, for having me here. I'm going to start, and this is kind of a really big kind of macro view. So it's going to the Cuyahoga Greenways. For those of you that have heard of the project, you're going to get to hear about it again. For those of you who haven't, I'm excited for you to hear about it for the first time. So what exactly is the Cuyahoga Greenways? Well, it's a countywide initiative to sort of envision, plan, and hopefully implement over 800 miles of greenways and urban trails throughout the region. It's an interconnected system of greenways that tie in with public transit and parks to offer recreational opportunities and options for getting around the county, to sort of elevate the health of the community and the individuals who call it home. So a little bit of background on the project. It was funded through the NOACA TLCI program, a planning grant, and it was building off of the 2014 East Side Greenway plan. That plan's focused on about 19 communities on the east side, and sort of during that process, a lot of people felt that maybe we should take the plan bigger and look at a larger area. So that's what we're doing here with the Cuyahoga Greenways plan. And it was guided by collaboration from 3 regional organizations, County Planning, the Metro Parks, and NOACA, each utilizing their success and sort of expertise in transportation to help not only generate ideas, but also work with collaboration through other regional agencies and other local groups. The core and consultant team are also supported by a team of 29 regional agencies, spanning throughout the county, and all those groups and stakeholders participated in the plan through various meetings and workshops. So when you think about a background, obviously Greenways traced to the Metro Parks system. It's a significant asset in Cuyahoga County. It provides millions of dollars in benefits to the residents. And because of the vision that was established in 1917, we have about 165 trails or trail miles within both the Cuyahoga or the Metro Parks system and throughout the county. So as the Metro Parks recently celebrated their centennial, the thought was, what's the next 100 years of connectivity look like throughout the Cuyahoga County? But as you can see, the system is kind of fragmented. Obviously we have significant assets in the Emerald Necklace, and like Jim mentioned, the towpath trail is that north-south spine running right through the county. But the network there's gaps. There's obviously some significant gaps between existing trails, and there's also a lot of neighborhoods that don't have any trails at all, including very limited to almost no trail access along the lake. So in addition to that, the trail system doesn't reach all the residents. Some of the more densely populated areas in blue and some of the more dense job areas in orange don't have trail access. So the Cuyahoga Greenways plan is sort of, at its core, an effort to address some of these gaps and sort of extend trails and greenways into parts of the county that may have little or no access today. So another thing when you think about context is you just think about the way our county's been developed. Obviously, as an urbanized area, there's little room for us to build what we would think of new greenways. So we have to rethink about that in terms of repurposing existing land. You can see the Metro Parks has done a great job in preserving and expanding, open space when available. But, over the past 70 years, we're using twice as much land as we were for home and business and transportation, with pretty much the same population. So obviously, it's an auto-dominated area, and automobiles still continue to be people's sort of choice for transit options. So, with the sprawling development patterns and everything, one of the things of the Greenways plan is how can we retrofit some of those existing areas? So with those limited space available, can we retrofit existing roadways or underutilized spaces to adapt for some of these urban trails? So with all those kind of context in mind, we came up with a couple different goals for the project. We wanted to be accessible. We wanted to build a connected system that was logical and user-friendly. We wanted to be bold. We wanted to sort of drive and attract economic vitality, sort of focusing on building connections to key destinations, supporting tourism, retaining residents. We wanted to be equitable. We wanted to serve all communities and all ages and all abilities. And we wanted it to be healthy. We wanted to promote active lifestyles and connect to those existing natural features. So real quick, when we talk about designing for all ages, what does that mean? Well, starting in 2006, Roger Geller, who was the bicycle coordinator of Portland, did a study, and people have done successive studies since then, and what those studies have identified that bicyclists pretty much fall in 4 different categories: strong and fearless, enthused, confident, interested but concerned, and no way, no how. And the interested and concerned group is the majority in most of these studies, and what those people are, they're sort of people who are described as curious about cycling, would like to ride more, but are a little bit afraid to ride. And in all the studies, they found the number one reason people didn't want to ride wasn't because they were afraid of other bicyclists, wasn't because they were afraid of pedestrians or even operating a bicycle. They were afraid of automobiles and being on the road. And obviously now with texting and driving and things like that, you can imagine that's even more of the case. So the logic and the goal in the Greenways plan is that if we make bike networks safer for that interested and concerned group, more people will use it and more people will become physically active. So sort of focusing on those high comfort, low stress facilities like protected bike lanes, side paths, and trails. That way we can get a larger segment of the population to use these facilities and kind of capture that all ages and all abilities network. So what do we do and how do we do it? So we started with public engagement. It was a sort of pretty widespread effort to connect to and hear from as many communities, residents, and outside groups as possible to provide feedback on the plan. In addition to that support of those 29 regional agencies, 43 of Cuyahoga County's 59 communities participated in stakeholder meetings throughout the planning process. And the plan in total hosted or participated in over 20 community-wide events and public meetings with residents from all over the county participating and providing feedback. In addition to that, we had mapping workshops, both in person and online, using online maps, GIS, surveys, live polling, and other ways to get people interacted with the plan, both at different scales, both at the regional scale and their local scale. And all these methods kind of provided a platform to sort of generate ideas, but also sort of, collaborate with the community and provide ways for us to collect all of that stakeholder feedback and community input on the plan to sort of shape all those routes. So this is where we kind of came up with our process. What we think of the plan is we think it is community-driven and data-enriched. And what we think here is the data and analysis is used to inform the decision-making process, but it doesn't make the decisions. We want the community to also be a part of the decision-making process. So the first step was identification of candidate routes. I mean, obviously, in most cases, we'd like to have more greenways and off-street type facilities, but knowing in that sort of urbanized environment, in some areas we're going to be constricted, so we're going to have on-street sort of what we're calling urban trails. To do this, the first thing we did was we looked at existing plans, known gap opportunities, old TLCI plans, other plans to identify, where routes could be. And then we also did a technical analysis of existing corridors, right-of-way available, and other issues to figure out where our candidate routes could be. So we started with the existing trail network that I showed before, and then from there we sort of layered on top what we're calling our regional network. And the regional routes are intended to kind of be the backbones of the Greenway system. They kind of connect and expand that larger all ages and all abilities networks of trails across the county into a larger trail and open space system. They intended to close gaps in the network, intended to be for the broadest range of users, provide those cross-country linkages and links to major destinations. So, the kind of question is, so why is this important? Well, if we just added that regional network, we would help close some gaps in that existing trail system, but we'd almost double the amount of population within 1 mile of a regional trail and almost double the amount of jobs within 1 mile of a regional trail. So just that regional system alone would provide significant benefits, both health and environmental benefits, but also job and access benefits to county residents. But we didn't just stop there with the regional system, obviously, because you can see there's still some gaps in some neighborhoods don't have direct access. So from there, we came up with what we call the supporting routes. And the idea of the supporting routes is just do that, to kind of support the regional network. It provides those neighborhoods local connections to local destinations, but also gives them access to that larger regional network. So they can use the network both for local daily trips, but also as part of the larger regional system. So the total overall framework is about 850 miles of both existing and proposed facilities, with about 160 miles of regional trails proposed and about 460 miles of sort of the supporting route trail network as being proposed. So the second step with this, now that we had our candidate network, was to identify, do those candidates meet our goals? How do we evaluate each route to see, does it meet what we're trying to achieve here through the Greenways plan? So what we did is the project team, steering committee, and other stakeholders identified what we called 8 core factors that reflected some of the priorities, opportunities, and the benefits that future Greenway routes could provide. So what we did is we took dozens of data sets and we mapped them, we did technical analysis, and reviewed which data sets and which corridors met the goals. So an example of that was here with sort of population density. So all we did is we took all the data sets and we aggregated them over to a quarter-mile grid, so that way we'd have a consistently sized area for evaluation across the entire county. So as each proposed route passes through the grid, it's scored based on how well it meets that core factor criteria. So routes scoring in the top 20% or the bottom 20% were usually highlighted. So here's an example of this method using population density. The top 20% of candidate routes serving the highest density are shown here in red. So we did this with every core factor across the entire county, across the entire network. And so this is what this looked like. So following that population density example, 800 miles of trails and over 1,300 candidate route segments were evaluating using data sets that made up the 8 core factors of trail access, park access, transit access, mobility, social equity, jobs, destinations, and habitat. So then what we did from there is we took all of those analysis, even did what we call the hybrid connection analysis, and then we sort of compiled those into a composite segment analysis. And what we did there was identifying which routes scored high across multiple core factors multiple times. So with all of that kind of wrapped up, what we kind of come up with, after we evaluate all the routes, what we want to do is prioritize a sort of smaller set for implementation. With hundreds of miles of routes proposed, it was a good idea to sort of identify those routes that meet many or all of the project goals, and understanding that some routes may move quickly to implementation while others maybe take longer because they're more of a transformative project. So what are our results? Well, what we did is we came up with a prioritization plan, which is kind of the culmination of this kind of regional collaboration and sort of route identification and technical evaluation. It takes all of those 800 plus miles and 13 route segments and boils them down into 69 named projects, or about 240 miles divided into 3 categories. What we're calling critical gaps, were just that, critical gaps. They reflect shorter in length, potentially high impact projects that kind of stitch the existing network together quickly. Regional links, again, are just that. They are intended to provide new cross-country, multi-jurisdictional connections and access to key destination points. And then last are the key supporting routes, so that reflect strong local connections or routes that scored highly across our analysis. So this is kind of our prioritization plan of all those 850 miles, some of the key routes to be implemented. So when we think about our Greenways plan, we think about it as being flexible. It should be used as a guide, as where we can look to move forward. What we're trying to do is just seek, and we're seeking to highlight sort of notable connections in the framework, where those existing gaps are, and then also identify aligned partners and previous plans for some of these projects. You know, what phase is the project in? Is this the first time it's been identified, or has it been studied many times before? And part of that is, you know, helping with resource allocation. You know, is there a way for potential multi-jurisdictional coordination amongst cities? Can projects be bundled together in one funding request, or can they be bundled together as part of other infrastructure improvements as we move forward? And again, as part of this, and you'll see from a lot of the great work that I'm sure these guys will show you today, is that we know there's not going to be one size fits all solution. A lot of this is going to be context sensitive, based on, you know, a variety of partnerships and local support. So when it comes to that partnership and coordination, we've already have some momentum building, and we know that, you know, that's going to have to continue, and it's going to be critical. One of the things we're doing in our organization at County Planning is we want to work to integrate all of these routes into our local master plans. This process can not only help sort of confirm alignments with the public and with the local community, but also help us determine alternatives if they think that another option or another route is better, or another facility type works better. And this kind of continual support and feedback through public engagement helps kind of the plan kind of move forward and can continue to evolve. We already have the Cuyahoga Greenways Partners, which is a great group that sort of started a lot of this work, and it's a collaborative across, you know, agencies across the county. A lot of those agencies participated in the planning process, and with a vested interest in trails. That group is great because it helps foster communication and agency collaboration, but they also can work to be an advocate for implementation of the plan, you know, going forward. And last but not least, I don't know if any of you saw it today, but during the State of the County speech, the Executive Director mentioned the Greenways plan extensively in his speech, talking about wanting to fund projects and opening up funding for some of these projects through the County Public Works roadway and bridge improvement program. So that's sort of a lot of momentum sort of pushing the project forward, and one of the great reflections of how the planning process has turned into actual actionable steps. So when that momentum continues, obviously during the process we did a lot of great things. The logo and branding piece was great because it helped people connect with the plan, not only during the process, but also continue to connect with the plan, you know, once the process is over and we move towards implementation. We had great media coverage to help drive people to meetings, but also to support and learn about the project. And last but not least, right now, Destination Cleveland is working on a signage and wayfinding pilot system for the Lakefront Bikeway and other trails kind of throughout Cleveland. And the great thing about this is, you know, it can kind of start to bring a lot of these different trail networks together, and each trail can have its own unique identity, but all the residents of the county can feel like they're part of this larger regional system that we're working to build towards. So with that, hopefully that was fast enough.
Thank you, Michael. Brian? Okay, Brian Zimmerman, the CEO of Cleveland Metro Parks, and certainly Cleveland Metro Parks has been doing a lot of work on trails, actually constructing a lot of trails over the last several years, and Brian's going to give us an update.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I really appreciate Michael's presentation on the Greenways plan. It's really nice to have the executive show some leadership relative to connecting these communities, and it really started out with the east side, and then it really morphed into kind of the bigger picture, and the Metropolitan Park districts in the area have been working as part of the NEOS plan that Hunter Morrison helped shepherd, of really taking the regional park districts between Lake, Lorraine, Geauga, Medina, and Summit counties, and really looking at our regional park system as it really pushes out related trail opportunities to connect the region even further. We've got one unique opportunity that we're working on in Lake County right now with Lake Metro Parks off of over by Squires Castle, which I think could be very positive. We're also working down in Solon, Bentleyville, and Chagrin Falls area to work on connecting over the Chagrin River into Geauga. That would be a really strong connection. There's already some in Summit we've talked about, but to highlight a few of the projects, and make no mistake, and these take time. These trails are not easy. There's a lot of hard work. This one that I'm going to highlight here is the Valley Parkway. This connects Broadview, Brecksville, and North Royalton. This started as a TLCI with the help of NOACA. They really helped fund and they helped bring implementation dollars. But this was 6.2 miles connecting 3 communities. And what was really unique and neat about it all at the same time, The community came together for the study. The mayors of each of the communities brought over $250,000 to help with the match. We were able to get congestion mitigation and CMAQ money. We were able to get Ohio Trails money. So there was a number of ways that we funded this along with the Park District's funds, but this connects 3 of the big communities to the due south of Cuyahoga County. This was long thought of as kind of one of the missing connections. We've got a lot of missing connections, so this isn't the only one, but this is one that helped complete the Emerald Necklace. It's capstone with Seneca Park Golf Course right in the middle of it, but again, this opened last year. Again, I want to highlight the strong connections between the communities of Broadview, Brecksville, and North Royalton, connecting and moving between the reservations. The Mill Creek Trail Connector, this was a love of labor, one of Jim's last jobs. I said I'd sent him to be a professor over here at CSU. This was a huge challenge. This is one of the spines that we talked about coming off of the towpath. The challenge that we had really making this connection to go up into Warner Hill. We had a trouble with one of our the landowners that did not want to respond for a long period of time, and we maneuvered very creatively, and they decided to give us a call back. And as I recall, they ended up basically donating the piece of property that held the project up for almost 3 years. So we were able to bring this forward. Cuyahoga Heights, this is really one of the champion projects. We've got a bunch of green walls, and we were able to make it ADA accessible with the switchback, but then the ultimate goal is it continues on and connects into Garfield Park Reservation, which you'll hear at some point in time, of how to linearly connect. When Councilman Terrell Pruitt was out at Carouche, the Lee Harvard area, he had plans to bring Carouche Park back through one of the one of the river corridors all the way back into Garfield Park. Elevation in Cuyahoga County is a challenge. That was one of the challenges of that particular area, but we did span the bridge here and really make this really nice connection. Again, this was funded. This is about a $3.1 million project. Lake Link Trail, so this is, again, coming off of the towpath, $50 million investment that has been led by a host of agencies and non-governmental organizations, but this was really spearheaded with a couple of very strong donations. One, $2 million grant from the Gunn Foundation, $5 million from the Cleveland Foundation, and then the Wendy Park Foundation brought $3 million. So that's over $10 million worth of private funding that helped really spur what we would call the Tiger Grant application, and we were able to thread together a whole bunch of different opportunities to connect the trails. The Lakefront Bikeway, 2 of those sections, one of them is being paved under Main Avenue in the past 2 days, making the connection from the Shoreway right by St. Malachi's off of West 25th down to actually the Lake Link Trail, and I'll show one of the pictures of that. But this was a huge project to span across a railroad and to really link our way and work our way towards the lakefront, and I'll highlight a couple of the other things. So this is again called the Cleveland Foundation Centennial Lake Link Trail. It is a mouthful, but the trail is really threaded through a really unique part, and it's got amazing views into the city of Cleveland, as you can see there, highlights some of the architecture, and then ultimately connects to Wendy Park and makes the connections into that we're working on from the Whiskey Island Connector Trail, and then also the Red Line Greenway, which the Rotary and Lenny's in the audience today that have been working on for decades. It's really nice to be able to see that connection be made through this $8 million Tiger Grant. Over $22 million was raised to bring these trails together. So it's interesting, a lot of folks go down to the Indianapolis and look at their trail system down there, and it's interesting, the individual that kind of put that program together, he's jealous of our trails up here, which is really nice to see at least some friendly competition between these Midwestern cities. But being able to link the assets here is so vitally important, and the work that the East Side Greenway and the whole Cuyahoga County Greenways plan will help map things out for the future. The Wendy Park Bridge is truly a love of labor and a labor of love. We've had a lot of work to do to get across the Norfolk Southern Rail Corridor and really linking this into Wendy Park. This is a over $6 million bridge project. It is originally designed by Rosales. It has been redesigned by Norfolk Southern. However, they will not get credit for it. Any of those who work with the railroads, you'll know what I'm talking about. The challenges you have to meet signal, lane, distance guidelines, and there's a whole host of other things. So, we had an iconic design, and now we have a bridge that meets our needs, and we're happy to be breaking ground. We've actually started moving the utilities and keeping things moving forward. And one of our park commissioners, our current board chair, Debbie Berry, is in the audience, and this isn't possible without guidance, and we've created a trail matrix that we've lived by, which helped kind of feed information to the Greenways plan to continue to move this region forward. And we continue to try to bring projects and programs that help connect. And what I think is great about the work that we're doing right now, it connects the Lakeview Estates area and connects a really economically disadvantaged area that has been cut off from the lakefront for so many years, and now we're creating this access point moving forward. We also have a non-paved trail that we're opening and dedicating this weekend. This is in Parma. This is a work that Derek and a host of others from the city of Parma, but we'll be celebrating the Cleveland Hiking Club's 100-year anniversary on the day, and we'll be able to dedicate this overlook. And if you come, that's Eli. If you actually look just past him, that's actually looks straight into downtown, and you can see Terminal Tower. So this is a 1.5-mile aggregate loop. It's got pull-offs for ADA access. It meets the trail standards, and then there's an internal loop there as well. So not only are we doing a lot of paved trails, we're doing a lot of reservation-centric, all-purpose and earthen trails. We've created over 16 miles worth of mountain biking trails. So at 11 o'clock at the Keystone Shelter in Parma off of West Ridgewood Road, you're more than welcome to come out and see this wonderful overlook trail. So thank you.
City of Cleveland is also very busy working on various trail projects, and Freddie Collier will come up and talk about some of the things that city is doing.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, everyone, for allowing me to be here to talk about some of the City of Cleveland's work with respect to trails. One thing I do want to highlight is the fact that when we talk about trail connectivity, we have to really not only think about the trails that you saw in those illustrations, but also think about how we're connecting to neighborhoods. And in order to do that, you really need to start focusing on how trails connect to street networks and what that begins to look like when we talk about a hierarchy of trail systems. One of the things that we wanted to do back in 2007 when we first did our bikeway master plan for the city of Cleveland was really look at a hierarchy of trail systems so that people could have options. I really appreciate the graphic that was shown in the first presentation that highlighted the blue lines on that map. Those blue lines do represent that neighborhood connectivity. I want to talk to you a little bit about where we've been because I think it's very important to understand, as it was discussed earlier a little bit, that it takes time to do things, and part of taking time is really changing culture and changing how we do business and how we allocate resources. So one of the things that really led the City of Cleveland's efforts with respect to bicycle planning really was the Connecting Cleveland 2020 citywide plan. Hunter Morrison, who is our former planning director and a mentor of mine, really forced us to start really experiencing trails by actually going out physically and riding the trail system and really riding down through neighborhoods and really understanding. He wanted us to get out the office and really experience these things firsthand. And that's really where it began for us to really understand back in 2007 when it was our master bikeway plan was produced. What were the needs and really what did we have to offer with respect to creating options for people in neighborhoods? This is the master bicycle plan that was completed between 2005 and 2007. It's efforts like this that feeds into the county plan that was shown earlier. This really introduced what we call that hierarchy of trails and really starting to look not just at trails that could connect through our park systems, which was the low-hanging fruit, but really focus on trails that are on the road and connections that really connected you to neighborhood assets. So currently, the Cleveland Climate Action Plan really began to sort of take a deep dive with respect to implementation. And this is where we started to really take city resources and invest them in ways that will provide opportunities to provide those connections. This chart here shows you, prior to 2009, there were only 36.6 miles of existing bicycle infrastructure. We begin to chart sort of where we have come from since 2009 and the additions of the types of trails, as you can see, from 2010 to 2017. So protected bike lanes were added, and that's illustrated in the dark purple, share roads, literal dedicated trails, and then also bike lanes. Again, advancing this idea of a hierarchy and really trying to ramp that up year to year. NOACA has been a really huge partner in helping us with investment opportunities, which I'll talk a little bit more about as I move through the presentation. This is what Cleveland Bicycle Network, when we did our implementation plan, we started to really understand where our existing bicycle infrastructure in 2013. As you can see, this map looks relatively sparse. When you look now, what you start to see is those additions that are illustrated in the previous graph that really shows sort of where we're kind of ramping up and advancing our bicycle infrastructure in the city. And again, it's not one-dimensional, it's dynamic, where we have multiple options for people to be able to have adequate bicycle and pedestrian amenities. Just to give you an example about sort of where we're going in the future, one of the really key assets now that the city has is Opportunity Corridor. One of the reasons that Opportunity Corridor is an asset now is because you have a dedicated connection for cyclists with an actual dedicated trail that leads you from University Circle into the Slavic Village neighborhood via Opportunity Corridor. So this $331 million road investment is complemented by an actual dedicated trail connection, and that was not intuitive. That was something that was a point of advocacy by the city and several partners. The other piece when we talk about rethinking our streets is focusing on neighborhoods. This is the Thrive 105-93 initiative, really building off of Opportunity Core, trying to link challenged neighborhoods like Glenville, as well as the Buckeye neighborhood, to investment opportunities in University Circle and others. And one of the ways that we felt that could be done is making sure that our street was multimodal and offered opportunity for pedestrians, cyclists, public transit, as well as the automobile. The other initiative that I think is very noteworthy to talk about is the concept around the Lorraine Avenue cycle track. NOACA provided about $6.1 million in funding to help advance this effort. The study was completed several years ago, but the funding allocation has yet to be fully realized. We have some gaps that have to be filled, but this is a concept that shows the Lorraine Avenue streetscape really becoming a different place. When we think about these trails and we think about how they integrate with neighborhoods, we have to really start to have a conversation about how we rethink our streets. Our streets are not designed to be pass-throughs, but they're places. So when you start to understand that the cyclist, the pedestrian, public transit, and all these things have to be integrated, it gives us a new sort of calculus about how we need to allocate financial resources to have a complete street in the 21st century. And this is going to be something that not just Cleveland, but other cities are going to have to contend with respect to financially having the resources to make sure that these streets do become something for all modes. And one of our most aggressive initiatives with respect to trail networks and really linking into the city grid and into neighborhoods is the Midway. We completed the Midway study several years ago, and we're at a point now where we have a good chunk of funding for this project. We analyzed many streets throughout the city of Cleveland. The selection of Superior Avenue was where the study recommended an initial pilot effort be undertaken. There's about $8.3 million that has been allocated for that process with the local city match. We have a few $1,000,000 that needs to be made up in order to realize this. But what this begins to introduce is a sort of change in direction with respect to the city of Cleveland and how it thinks about its streets. If in fact we're able to successfully do this over the next several years, it will really establish a new sort of paradigm and create a new opportunity that's equitable for folks to be able to utilize cycling as a legitimate option to connect to streets. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge former staff member back there, Arthur Smith, who you may all know, who worked diligently with us on this project. And this is something that we're really excited about and really proud of. The other example, when we talk about the future direction that we're going, is West 25th Street. West 25th Street is significant because you have significant land uses and significant investment that's happening there. And connecting those assets, for example, the Detroit Superior Bridge, many of you are familiar with that project and how that connects to the Market District area, and making sure that West 25th Street gets a road diet and becomes something that actually is not just for cars getting to work or getting on 28th to hop on the Shoreway, but a place for bikes, pedestrians, and public transit as well. These are just some concept images of what we want that corridor to mature to become. And as you can see, the trees added, you can see the dedicated lanes. You also see 2 lanes of traffic coming and going, but also the development that would actually flank the corridor. And this is right around Irishtown Bend, which of course you all may know is slated to be a hillside park that takes advantage of some significant city views. With respect to process and continuing the momentum, we're going to do a couple of different things coming up over the next couple of years. We aim to complete the bicycle master plan update and looking to do that in 2020. We want to try to add at least 15 miles of bike infrastructure, and that's on-road infrastructure. We want to build off the investments that have been provided through CMAQ. We also want to continue our work in Cleveland to help advance Cuyahoga Greenways, which is a very important initiative because it begins to scale up many of the efforts that are taking place. We also want to make sure that we focus more on protected bicycle infrastructure. So you're going to be seeing projects in the city of Cleveland with actual protected infrastructure. We're really focused right now on Fulton Road, which Church and State, which is a multi-unit investment, is going to be going in on Detroit Avenue. Most recently, Pete Snavely made a significant investment, and Fulton Road is being reconfigured, and that will have protected dedicated lanes with respect to that investment, particularly between Franklin and Detroit. So when we talk about dealing with making sure that our streets become multimodal, one of the things that we looked at when we looked at 105th Street, we really start to look at existing conditions and begin to ideate around what are some of the possibilities. Now, I use 105 as an example, but it's indicative of many streets throughout the city of Cleveland where we have to start to rethink how we invest in what type of infrastructure we need to put in. We looked at scenarios to, one, green up the street and really create a more desirable aesthetic on 105. But we also began to play around with sort of low-cost dedicated lanes that are protected to try to get a configuration that allow for that multimodal transportation and be able to do it in a safe way. We begin to look at areas along the corridor where you can actually extend the sidewalk and really create a sense of place on the sidewalks, reducing the bike lane to having 1 lane, 2 lanes of traffic with a turning lane. We also looked at examples for BRT, so bus rapid transit improvements, to make sure that the transportation network can move more efficiently, so dedicated bus lanes. More of a Euclid corridor type of example where you see here where you have sort of a transit platform in the middle of the street. We also looked at the prospect of a midway style scenario on the street where you would have enhanced crosswalks. You would also have one traffic lane coming in two traffic lanes in the opposite direction. We also looked at scenarios where you would have 3 traffic lanes in a protected cycle track, which is in one of the slides that you saw previously. Now, different streets and different corridors have different widths and can accommodate different types of scenarios. But this is just to give you an example of the universe of roadway types that we're starting to explore at the City of Cleveland. And for those of you who have not really spent time with our traffic engineers and others, you should be clapping at the fact that these conversations are being held. So I'm going to clap for us. But we're thinking differently. And I think part of the reason why I named this presentation New Directions is because we do feel a shift in culture and we do see our mindset changing. But of course, because no matter whether the economy is good or bad, public resources are always limited, so we still have some tough decisions that we have to make. But I do believe that we are moving in a very good direction of the City of Cleveland. So thank you.
The Environmental Design Group has been involved in a number of projects, not just here locally, but throughout Northeast Ohio and beyond. So Michelle Johnson will come up and talk a little bit about some of the projects that they've been working on.
All right, well, good afternoon. Before we start talking about a couple projects that are located kind of right outside our door here, wanted to talk a little bit about how at EDG we approach planning, designing, and building trails. You know, being the only person up here from the private sector, we have a little bit different approach as far as, you know, who we work with. It's not just in the City of Cleveland, not just in Cuyahoga County, but it is all over the state of Ohio. So that's something that, you know, as we spend everyone's valuable resources and work with our clients to make Northeast Ohio as well as the state of Ohio a better place for all of us, all residents, all visitors, et cetera, making sure that we are absolutely maximizing our dollars and creating, you know, cultural infrastructure through destination experiences. So what does this look like? How do we do this? We're going to kind of walk through a little bit of the process, but understanding from a very, very high level plan, going down to an alignment study, going down to an actual schematic layout, and then lo and behold, you actually get to the CD set and things come to life. And that's something that we just absolutely, when you have that aha moment of going from having a drawing to literally coming to life, that is why we all come to work every day, to make sure that Northeast Ohio and the state of Ohio for that matter, but we all want Cleveland to be a better place, and that's something that we cherish. So what does that look like? A lot of us have been to the Solstice Steps. Yes, there's a trail there too. And that's something that is exactly what we're talking about, celebrating these destination experiences, creating cultural infrastructure that people identify with, that it becomes its own sense of place. It becomes its own there. It becomes its own Instagram handle. It becomes a place where people can walk their dogs, do yoga at 6 a.m. We never anticipated that. Apparently the steps do well for that. Those types of things where people kind of make spaces their own and have a strong identity with it. And the big part of our job is making sure that, you know, as everyone on this panel can attest to, our limited resources, how do we maximize those without expending extra dollars? How do we create those theirs and think a little bit differently about how we use materials and how we use money? Example that I'm going to talk about a little bit west of us, looking at the Erie County Sandusky area. Once again, we talk about this super high level 80-mile regional trail. Then we hone in looking at citywide. This project, by the way, is moving forward. It's a 12-mile lakefront trail network. For those of you that know Eric Wubser, the former Ohio City CDC director, you talk about outstanding leadership and things that can turn around from 2014. The amount of infrastructure that we are investing and dollars we are spending with his staff and his leadership is absolutely outstanding. But then we zoom in. We talk about bringing those projects to life. So a portion of the Sandusky Bay Pathway project is the Landing Park project. This is an $18 million park, trail, and greenway project that is TIFed. The area that you see that pretty much looks like a parking lot in the gray area, that is a Cedar Fair funded private development that, working with the city, we TIFed the entire project. And every single dollar going towards the project, from construction to design to all the environmental permitting, is being paid for by TIF funding, which is something with that dollar amount that's unprecedented. So we talk about setting the brand, thinking about high level. How do we create that there, having something that applies all the way through? The stripes that you're seeing on the Sandusky Bay Pathway image in front of you, that's our Follow the Yellow Brick Road. That is going to go along all 12 miles. No matter where you are, other than our boardwalk areas, you always know blue stripe towards the lake, green stripe toward land. This is our Follow the Yellow Brick Road. You know you're on the Sandusky Bay Pathway. If you've been on the towpath, it's the exact same thing. The mile markers, going all the way from Cleveland down through Summit County, even out of our region, you know that you're on that towpath because of those identifiers, and that's what we want to make sure. Lakefront Greenway is a perfect example that we're moving forward with that. And then we start developing the plan, thinking about, okay, how do we turn this alignment into something that people can access, that creates that there, to create ADA accessible experiences that aren't just for able-bodied folks, but for anyone that wants to experience what does that look like. So creating, again, those destination experiences, touching the lake, I think that's something that Cleveland can identify with. Greatest asset is right outside our door, and yet so many people don't know how to get to it. So how do we create those experiences? How do we create those areas that people want to be at, and kind of, whether it's a transportation function, a recreation function, how do we get people to it? And if we can't put our toes in the water, how do we make people feel like they're experiencing it? And that's something that's very important. This project in particular, like I said, is an $18 million project. We are within full design right now. That's something that the lighthouse that you just saw, this is a page from the plan set, but we are actively moving forward, and we expect to break ground in a year and a half on that. The big thing that I am very, very proud of for this project is that happenstance, basically, we have an all-female-led project team on our design. So going all the way from structural to landscape architecture to ecology to project manager, we are female-led. So the ladies of Landing Park, that's definitely something that's kind of cool. Again, unintentional. We want the best qualified people, and yet it's a pretty good crew that we have there. So Lakefront West, this is a pretty major undertaking that I think every single person on this panel was participating in. This was a $41.5 million roadway rehab, a downgrade from basically a highway to a streetscape boulevard, a trail project, a bridge replacement project, a bridge rehab project. But this gets us all the way from West Boulevard and Lake Avenue with an off-road trail to the West 25th and Detroit intersection in Ohio City. This is definitely something that was, from a time frame standpoint and from a creativity standpoint, especially as it related to stormwater, within a year design timeline, was outstanding. EDG partnered with Michael Baker International on this, and this was a quick moving project that, with the City of Cleveland agreement with the Regional Sewer District, we went into an MOU to treat 100% of the water quality, which is not required, but with it being a lakefront program, we all thought it was important to do that. So the engineering behind it, we had 13 different BMPs for stormwater associated with the project. I'm not going to go into all the nitty-gritty details, but so far, knock on wood, they are all working very well. Again, we talk about selling the vision. With the fast-paced nature of this project, going from very conceptual design into all the different design review, neighborhood review, city planning commission, et cetera. How do we create those areas that people identify with? The nodes that you see in front of you, yeah, they create a sense of place and a there. They also create safe pedestrian crossings, traffic calming, having beautification around you. makes you slow down naturally as a car. And that's, very important when it comes to understanding how people use places and how people navigate to and from. And then bringing those projects to life, again, in less than 12 months, that was something that, just very, very proud of the project team and everyone involved in that. That was a pretty cool project. The cool thing about this is that it's out there today. It's a little over 2 miles of trail that leads through Edgewater Beach as well as Beach House. You talk about these destination experiences, the Cleveland sign, something so simple, yet people identify with that. You see on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc., social media, people identify with this place, whether you're in Tremont, whether you're in downtown, whether you're in Edgewater. There's all sorts of places where, this land that we love, people identify with that. It can be as simple as a sign that has that backdrop, whether it's the Industrial Valley, downtown, but creating that kind of cultural infrastructure is something that we very much value. The nodes, again, are something that kind of create that there of, A, it's a place to rest, but B, it's definitely, a place that people identify with. You start seeing this cadence of places, the same materials, the same application, all ADA accessible, AASHTO standard, et cetera, and yet within the same budget, making sure that we're creating places and destinations that people can meet at, can identify with. This photo was actually taken by Brian Zimmerman right after the Metro Parks took over the lakefront parks. And this was actually on a Saturday. Brian was out there with all of his senior staff literally after the governor kind of signed the dotted line and had everything transferred. And the cool thing about that was pretty much this view. They were out there with the finance director, with accounting, with the service and maintenance manager, talking about what that could be. That's my dog, Buddy. So Buddy and I were out there on Saturday and ran into Brian and all of his staff, and all of that brush got cleared away. The big thing that I have this picture in that I want to mention is that this picture was taken on a Saturday. By Monday morning, the entire beach, the entire park, for all of our Lakefront West site was completely 180 turned around. There was a beachcomber out there every single day, people picking up trash, cutting down dead limbs that had not been maintained by the state for so long. We are talking a 3-day transformation, and that was something that, as the engineers that were on the project, just being out there every single day and literally within 3 days seeing a complete transformation. In order for us to have these cultural experiences and these, cultural infrastructure and destination experiences, we need to feel safe and we need things to be clean. And that's something that we just saw, it was before the trail was built, but going from not seeing anyone at Edgewater Beach to all of a sudden having a crowd was an amazing thing to see and kind of experience. So definitely hats off to Metro Parks for that. That was a really cool thing to see kind of in person out there with all the maintenance crews. So transitioning to Towpath Stage 3, Buddy crossed the Rainbow Bridge, but one thing that we did for Towpath Stage 3 and walking all of our sites is that at the Clark Field site, the old Cleveland Kennel was there. So lo and behold, we have Walter. So Walter now has visited Lakefront West as well as most of our projects. There's a lot of people in the audience that have met Walter. So, but that's something that we really felt moving forward from the Towpath project. Every time I walk past that kennel and every time I heard those dogs barking, we now have one of those guys in our home. And we'll get more to that later. So developing the plan. EDG is very proud to have developed a lot of the Towpath Trail from a conceptual level as well as from an engineering scale. The plan that you see in front of you is from 2002, I believe. We did most of Summit counties as well. So this is something well before my time at the firm we have been involved with. And we talk about developing the plan and selling the vision. I'm going to talk a little bit about the towpath mounds and kind of what that took to implement. But this was a project that, as we were sitting in a meeting, realizing that we had 44,000 extra cubic yards of just okay fill, not sure if it's contaminated or not. Do we pay to have it hauled off site or do we keep it on? And this is something that, as we were supposed to be paying attention in a meeting, Mr. Jeff Kerr was in there doodling and came up with this concept of, well, why would we pay to haul all of this off if we can potentially adaptively reuse it on site? And that was kind of how a sketch of the towpath mounds in an hour meeting turned into 1.5 years of our project team bringing this to life. So this is kind of, iteration after iteration, we all kind of joke that the towpath mounds was a cat with almost 9 lives. It was reaching its end. This is something just based off of all sorts of things that came up during design as well as during construction. Every time it felt like we were hitting a hurdle. One moment we realized that the ground wasn't stable, so we had to regrade the entire piece. The other side, the bridge had to be raised, and therefore the entire site had to be raised, and therefore everything had to be regraded. Then we find out during construction that the entire site is not geotechnically sound. Full redesign. Again, this is not something that we're moving forward with contract amendments. This is the entire project team making sure that this vision comes to life and actually creates that there, and that all the work that people put in is something that can be celebrated. This is now open. We haven't droned it lately, but this is something I think that people are now kind of seeing that. People are realizing that the intent of the mounds is to actually play on. We all heard of nature play as a playground. This is kind of a much larger scale of that we purposely made sure that these mounds, every single one of them, are climbable. And that was important. It's meant for people to try to, some of them are steep. I've been on the big one and it's, it's steep, but it's climbable, and it's meant for people to explore, to celebrate our history, to look into downtown, to look into the industrial valley. The intent of the mounds was to mimic the industrial valley piles, so whether it's coal, sand, salt, etc. Looking at that, and from the top, you can definitely see what that cultural infrastructure is and kind of mimicking from across the valley. So other than that.
Thank you, Michelle. Our final speaker today is Derek Schaefer. He is the Executive Director of the West Creek Conservancy, and West Creek has been involved with a variety of projects throughout the state of the county, but in addition, they've done a lot of work in connecting to the towpath through the West Creek Greenway. So, Derek?
All right, thank you, Jim. All right. Now that I've seen and heard these 4 other presentations, I completely want to change mine. Because I feel like I'm coming at it from a very different angle. And if you've never heard of our organization, that's okay. We're a small, whopping staff of 4 people, and we do work across greater Cleveland and Cuyahoga County and even a little beyond. But the bulk of our job is the very nitty-gritty, the real estate component, the reclamation component, the restoration component. And we've been around for 22 years, but the one thing I want to harp in on is, even though I'm speaking on behalf of West Creek, everything that we do at West Creek is progress through partnerships, because we don't do everything ourselves. We may have a vision and help it bring it to reality, but just keep that in mind as I'm speaking, that everything that we do has partnerships born through it. So the 3 big words that we always use is this: protect. We do actually acquire our own land, whether it's in fee simple interest, environmental covenant, conservation easement, lease, license, however, to get control of the land in order to get what. And I love seeing the pictures and the aerial drone footage of all these trails that are on the ground, but I see it from a very different perspective. I see it from when it was nothing, or when it was just this barren, blighted area that's now transformed. So our organization is kind of on the very back end of the infrastructure, and I love seeing the connectivity of these places. But from our perspective, Greenways take on a variety of meaning, whether it is a trail or an actual just wildlife connection, or a neighborhood connector, or a regional connector, or transit connecting assets. But it's also, and I hear the word assets a lot, but the one thing that we really focus on is people, connecting people. We have a very spread out population, so we realize that we have to do the acquisition to reconnect people that are fragmented from themselves. And it's funny that Jim showed the picture of the guy stealing a TV on a bike. I was presenting on a project in Seven Hills in 2007, and a guy crumpled that up and threw it at me when we did a presentation. And I picked it up after the meeting, and I still have it on my wall. And that guy has come to every public meeting since 2007 thanking us. So when Freddie talked about cultural change, it absolutely is a cultural change, where it used to be not in my backyard, and now it's where's my trail. And so from our end of the work, protection is one of the largest things. Is not only buying it for connection standpoint, it's also reclaiming some unsustainably developed lands, or where we believe a trail needs to go through and all the plans have coincided. We may have to see what structures or facilities or houses or whatever else we have to buy in order to do it. And there's always this three-pronged approach. So we are a land conservancy, but we do take a land conservation approach to restoration and trail connection. So in tandem with a lot of our projects, it is floodplain restoration, habitat restoration, tree canopy, stream naturalization, ecological integrity restoration or enhancements through all these areas. Because yes, we love trails, but we also want our ecological functions of streams, waterways, and floodplains to be true assets along the way. We want, we're not anti-development, but we want to be sustainable development within the parameters that enable a functioning, thriving, and connected community. And I can't say how many communities we're on the ground in, but it's probably around 61. And whether it is a full-scale restoration that you add a trail to, or it's a bank stabilization that you hope to connect to another piece down the line. And a lot of times we're operating on this blissful naivety that we'll buy a couple pieces here and a couple pieces upstream, a couple pieces downstream. We can't always buy lands that are next to each other. We kind of have to piece the puzzle back together. Because as Mike showed, that a lot of these lands, we're nearly the same population, but we've spread out. So now we have to kind of reconnect not only our lands and the fragmented environment that it is, but it's the people that we have to reconnect through sometimes undeveloping lands. And Jim mentioned the West Creek Greenway. So this was truly an effort, and Brian mentioned the Lookout Ridge by the Cleveland Hiking Club. So if you look at number 8 on the map, this is originally what was called West Creek Preserve. It was a truly cliche grassroots effort where citizens in Parma came together, fearing loss of green space, because at this point there was almost no green space in Parma, and that's a 90,000 person population. And talk about post-World War II development that was rampant, one of the fastest growing cities in the United States at that time. And if you look at an aerial, it is just grid development. And we buried and sized, entrenched, moved, filled our waterways left, right. And in 1997, a group of citizens came together, went door to door, literally to get a ballot initiative passed to preserve the original 80 acres. And over the next 20 years, that 80 turned into 324. In 2006, we handed it off to Cleveland Metro Parks in partnership with the Sewer District and obviously the city of Parma, one of our largest partners as well. And it became the 16th reservation in the Emerald Necklace. But the vision of West Creek Conservancy at that time wasn't just to create a park for that neighborhood. It was to create a trail and greenway system that would connect throughout those 5 communities, connecting at the towpath through Independence on the north, and as well as, so number 2 and 3 on the map, as well as 18 and 19 on the monitor. And I'm proud to say that at this time, about 85% of that land along the trunk line, what I call 2 through 19, we'll call it, has been secured by West Creek Conservancy and its partners. And that's hundreds of parcels of land. And I love when we see 2 miles of trail on the ground. When I see 2 miles of trail on the ground, I see 45 landowners and 60 grant applications and dozens of council meetings and some happy neighbors, some angry neighbors, some misinformed neighbors, and getting through the process of actually building the West Creek Reservation. I've met all kinds, and that's the beauty of it, is it is a cultural change where now 8 and 10 neighborhood values have increased. New housing development, the first in Parma since like don't quote me, 70-ish, has gone up across the street from the reservation. It's amazing to see the reciprocal benefit and the proximity of green space to people. And when Trust for Public Land and Cleveland Metro Parks did their economic impact analysis a couple years ago, we saw residual property values rise. We saw the connectivity to trails and greenways as now a marketable value for the city of Parma. And this is one of the biggest puzzles that, I can tell you every parcel along every one of those numbers and what we still have to connect these days, but it piece by piece is coming quite along. And Freddie had a good statistic of how many people in proximity of trail systems. And within West Creek Reservation alone, so if you're standing at the Watershed Stewardship Center, you're within 1 mile of 44,000 44,000 people, 17,000 residences that are within 1 mile. But Parma still only has 5.4, 5.5 green space. But as we start to connect these regional routes through the County Greenway Initiative and through initiatives of Cleveland Metro Parks and partnerships with the city of Parma and so many others, the trail system really comes to life. So, when that 324 acres was really born, it was this chunk of land off of West Ridgewood, Broadview State, Pleasant Valley, but it wasn't connected. So we've been working over the last 22 years to literally keep buying and undeveloping certain pieces, whether it's people's backyards, side yards, rear lots, access easements, to get across a valley that was truly just forgotten. and now we're toppling 500 acres in connectivity into 2 different communities now. So the initiative started by citizens, now staffed by 4, and with partnership of Cleveland Metro Parks and the City of Parma, you're now aiming to connect over 90,000 people alone within 1 mile of West Creek Reservation. And if you look at West Creek, it's this tiny little green map on the Emerald Necklace, but it kind of sits in the heart of it. So you want to see it connect to the towpath to the east, to Big Creek Reservation to the west, north again to the towpath, and have that regional network that Freddie really touched on, connecting down Broadview Road toward the zoo to Lower Big Creek Greenway. So when we talked about, or when I harp on when I see 2 miles of trail on the ground, I see these numbers. And every landowner that I have to work with, whether buying them outright or I have to go to kids' birthday parties sometimes to get contracts signed. It's amazing, because whether you're upsurfing somebody's life or you're trying to convince them to sell for the greater good, or you're buying them because they're in a floodplain or riparian area, it's the puzzle that puts these back together. And it has some of these acquisitions on here, they just look like pretty nice green spaces, but you think about them, none of them were bought in any sort of sequential order. They were sometimes funding drives opportunity, sometimes opportunity drives funding, and sometimes an antsy landowner drives funding, or a political climate that changes. And so, the whole effort here is to extend West Creek Reservation north, south, east, west, and connect into the 4 corners of the Emerald Necklace. And in partnership with Cleveland Metro Parks, we're hitting the marker of getting up from Ridgewood all the way to Broadview, Snow and Broadview, and south to Pleasant Valley, and east out to the towpath. So new communities served, new connections made, new regional networks, not only connected, but also preserved. Because most of the land within this hodgepodge of numbers on the map is owned by West Creek Conservancy. So we have the responsibility to own it, maintain it, steward it, and eventually hopefully have an end-use partner that can take it into perpetuity as a trail and park system. This is just kind of a closer view of the parcel layers of how West Creek Conservancy gets connected. And I don't know if you can see the actual parcel lines, but none of the trail system in West Creek is going to be 2 or 3 landowners. And when the Red Line Greenway was coming up, I was very envious of Lenny because he had one giant stretch of property and maybe 2 to 3 landowners, and maybe I'm not minimizing that at all in the complexity, but I looked at West Creek Reservation and I go, I have 144. And that's 144 people, 144 personalities, and 4 communities with 29 councilmen. So this is going to be fun. This just kind of gives you an idea of how we try to piece together the puzzle that was once fragmented, because you also look at this and go, well, it's all green space, and I can name every parcel in there where we've acquired a house, a car wash, an office, a barn, a piece of old school property, and rear lots, old dumps, and reclaim them. So when you're talking about an urban environment, you're talking about an environment that was kind of put on the back shelf for so many years, used as dumping grounds, used as just fill areas. And so how do you reclaim that and turn it into something that's a perpetual public asset? And we also had to take on the kind of overwhelming initiative of reclamation, where and this is kind of a double-edged sword, I'll admit this first, was that if you've heard of Parmadale, this was a reclamation of an 80-acre site with 28 acres of structures, roads, knocking down a significant amount of structures. But if you look at the map, it also adds 80 acres and a whole new connectivity to West Creek Reservation. So sometimes an organization like this that can be kind of nimble and versatile has to jump on an opportunity, not only work with a property owner to preserve 80 acres, but try to have that vision and maybe just, again, naivety that will come to fruition and raise the funding we need for acquisition, demolition, reclamation, environmental cleanup, and eventually synthesize it into the park system. And this was a large undertaking with a significant risk and liability, because 28 structures attracts a lot of people who like to break windows and cut copper. And the infrastructure was 1922. So nobody knew where anything was. So this has been a true investigation and reclamation of a site that was great in its former years, and then once its traditional usage had passed, it was in our portfolio to acquire it and demolish 28 acres of buildings and synthesize it into a park. And that's kind of what it looks like now on the left-hand side. That was where the cottages were. And keep in mind, these cottages were 10,000 square foot apiece. And there were 16 of them, and there's this old school and clock tower. So when we talk about urban preservation, there's a lot of reclamation that has to go into it, and undeveloping things that shouldn't be there anymore or don't need to be there anymore, and turning it back into something that's helping to provide function for our overall watershed health. On the eastern edge of the terminus of the Greenway, we've been proposing to meet the towpath for a couple decades. We originally started this project when Kucinich was in office. So when somebody said trails take time, hell yeah, they do. We were going through 2 different jurisdictions and federal land. And once you're in federal land, it's a lot of fun. We had to also work around significant infrastructure. But this is a 1.7 mile trail that is connecting Brecksville Road next to the Cleveland Clinic Business Operations Center. And Dick Pace with Cumberland Development used that as a carrot to attract Cleveland Clinic. They were going to have trail connectivity to the 110-mile spine of the towpath right out their back door. So this trail will be opening in June. And I might even drop Kucinich a line and let him know, because this was a part of this funding we leveraged through a earmark through Safety Lou a couple transportation bills ago, and Clean Ohio Trails, and the City of Independence put in over $1 million cash. An amazing investment by a city that you don't see very often in the suburbs, but this trail will be a true asset, and it's one of the National Park's largest community connectors. And if you see that big puddle to the down right of the map, that's a former Haydite mine. And West Creek Conservancy is now in the process of restoring it over the next 3 years. It's a 100-acre site that has been in operation for 180 years. And it's surrounded by Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Maybe that's a little better. Yeah, it's the beigey orange piece on there. It's bordered by the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Rail, our new Hemlock Creek Trail, the National Park, city protected land, and the Cuyahoga River. So is this where we can have the river meet the water, or the trail meet the water trail, and synthesize it with the national park, the scenic rail? So it was just an opportunity that we had to pounce on as an organization to reclaim 100 acres and synthesize it into Cuyahoga Valley National Park, hopefully within about 3 years. It was called out in the origination documents of Cuyahoga Valley National Park, but no one knew exactly what it was going to be or what we were going to do with it. And it was expected to be under mining operations for another 50 to 75 years. But we had the opportunity and worked with a very awesome family in the City of Independence and got it donated on New Year's Eve 2018. Mining operations ceased January 1, 2019, and we became miners. So the puzzle piece that I talked about in the dual reciprocal benefit, sometimes it's aligning corridors for floodplain protection. It's the most underutilized asset in the urban environment to control stormwater and non-point source pollution. So we also look at opportunities that may not just be pretty green spaces, and may serve no trail function whatsoever, but they create these naturalized greenways for our streams to function naturally. And Brian even mentioned it, and Jim mentioned it, and Mike mentioned it. We have ecological implications to consider, and sometimes we just got to buy green space so we have the rest of our green space that functions in a more naturalized aspect. So this is a piece of Baldwin Creek. It's one of the most impacted tributaries of Rocky River, and it's kind of just putting puzzle pieces back together, buying where you can, knocking things down where you can, buying backyards, side yards, and creating this greenway loop that maybe someday it'll turn into a trail, but at this point it's just for floodplain access. Assets along a trail. This is along Morgana Run in Slavic Village, turning the old Woolston Mills into a learning lab for Slavic Village, or for the Boys and Girls Club and Mound Elementary School with the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. So again, this is an asset that will serve hundreds of kids a day along a trail system that will be regionally connected throughout the greater Cleveland area. Irishtown Bed, Freddie touched on this. West Creek Conservancy is actually the proud owner of most of the riverfront there off of Riverbed. And we've been working with private landowners over the last couple of years to really reclaim that half-mile section of the Cuyahoga River in partnership with Land Studio. I can't name all the partners. There's like 42 at every meeting. So the big ones that I usually work with are CMHA, Land Studio, and the Port Authority and Ohio City Incorporated that are helping to formulate the acquisition and preliminary development of Irishtown Bend. And obviously, Cleveland Metro Parks and the City of Cleveland are the big major players in it because it connects the Lake Link Centennial Trail as well as Red Line Greenway, and it's going to provide a whole transformative initiative connecting Ohio City down to the river. I mean, if you were sitting at Merwin's Wharf and you look across the river, it's a big green space with a lot of issues, and not only geotechnical and water and infrastructure, it's a socioeconomic issue. This is going to be one of our most complex puzzle pieces to acquire, reclaim, and restore, and hopefully integrate into somebody else's hands because we are 4 people. I can skip over that. I've already mentioned the connectivity of this to Red Line Greenway, the towpath, Lake Link Centennial Trail. And to me, reclaiming Irishtown Bend is a no-brainer. And yes, it is a risky venture, absolutely. But if we turn away from risky ventures, we're not going to fix problems like Irishtown Bend, the reconfiguration of Franklin and 25th, the stabilization that supports 20,000 jobs, $3.5 billion economic impact. So you look at Irishtown Bend and see a trail, you also have to realize that it is a sustaining factor of the river and the shipping industry and an economic driver and catalyst. And it's funny how many developers, you see those little white posts poking out of Carter Road down there, and you know they're ready for their next series of townhomes. People want to live next to the trail and the river. They want to be connected to Ohio City and downtown. Irishtown Bend is just going to be a further catalyst for development in that region. And this is one of my hardest projects where I've had to approach 16 landowners in a row and ask them to move. The creek's falling, or not the creek's falling, the houses are falling. They're gonna fall. This is where Mill Creek is well overdeveloped and tumultuous, and the tumultuous flows and the volumes are just creating an entrenching effect on infrastructure and on homes. So we're engaging people, getting ahead of an opportunity before their situation gets worse. But it's amazing the people you have to deal with and work with, not deal with, that's the wrong word, work with, to get them to understand the opportunity when it comes down to creating or recreating our natural greenways and ecological pathways. This is another picture in Hemlock Creek in Seven Hills where I've had to go door to door like a salesman, convince people I'm not crazy, ask them to move until we can restore the ecological integrity of Hemlock Creek. And this is just a part of a facet of our work. And you know, the reclamation has so many everyone says it's expensive to buy buildings and knock down buildings. Yeah, it is. It's very expensive, but the long-term approach is absolutely absolute, and we're not putting a Band-Aid on it anymore. You know, when we fund the FEMA program and FEMA bails out people who flood, it's just a cycle that's vicious and it's costing us long-term. So quit building in the floodplain and work with us on acquisitions in the floodplain. You know, neighborhoods, people don't understand it. They see us doing an acquisition and boom, they assume park, trail, basketball courts. It's misinformation. So getting ahead of the game, and Michelle touched on it as well, is that getting our part of the Greenway initiated is dealing with people, asking the right questions, getting the right information out there, doing your background, having your due diligence solid. You know, you can consider your jurisdictional considerations, your management capacity, the partnerships and arrangements, the messaging to people. You're not always selling the why, but you're also selling the whom. And my staff always says I nag till acquiescence. And working with landowners in these areas, it's an approach we have to take over and over to put the right information out there, get the understanding on the ground, work with them on acquisition, piece together greenways, and it has that multiple-pronged effect of protection, restoration, and connection. So that protect, restore, connect is kind of what we do. I'm trying to talk fast because I know it's 83 degrees and we want to get out of here and have some fun. So I'm done.
Good job. Those of us who have worked in either currently work or have worked in the public sector really appreciate people like Derek, who is really the guy that has boots on the ground and is constantly making these projects happen. So thank you, Derek, for all the work you do. Okay, we have a few minutes for questions. So if you would like to ask a question, we just ask you to come up to the microphone and please ask your question. So anyone? Jeff?
So looking out 10 years from now, funding's obviously, we keep on talking about all the creative ways we're funding. Looking out 10 years, how do you see funding changing for trails in the next decade?
Pass.
I don't know that we know the answer. I mean, I think it's, you know, one of the things where when you look at, I would say, the plan, and when you look at the greenways, that lays out a very positive grid system. If you don't have a plan, you can't ask for funds. And it depends on whether CMAQ stays, you know, how Trails funds, you know, now the county executive in his State of the County today talked about trails and trails connections and the importance of it. City of Cleveland is putting a priority to it. Metropolitan has been putting a priority to it. Again, I think momentum will continue. When you look at where development is following the trails, that's a positive. That's a very positive story. And you can show that economic, you know, balance back and forth. I liked what Michelle talked about in the TIF financing opportunities. I think it's going to be more public-private partnerships to fund these. The TIF, I think, is a very solid way of doing it, and certainly that's helped build the towpath. That's one of the ways that got done. So The models are there, but it's going to need to add green space and landing because that's what people are looking for. The work that Derek's doing, trying to reshape the way the city built over everything and trying to kind of undo it, that's going to be really interesting to see how the sewer district has their funding mechanisms. So, I mean, I touched on like 4 or 5 different governmental agencies, the private side of things. It will be interesting to see where the feds land with their funding. The Tiger, some of the funds kind of ebb and flow depending on administration. So that's the best way I could answer that question.
Any other questions? No.
I first moved to Cleveland whenever the Healthline project was kind of under construction, and so it's really exciting to see these other complete street projects, these really, really big projects that can start to connect different neighborhoods. And I'm curious how, like taking the Healthline project, how approaches have changed, or if there were lessons learned from that project kind of going forward into Opportunity Corridor and some of the other streetscape projects that you highlighted.
Yeah, I think there was definitely some lessons learned. One of those is you got to be very careful where you plant trees so they don't die on you. That's one. But I think what's happening now with the result of something like the Healthline taking place and seeing the $4 billion of investment that $200 million investment has spawned is really forcing us to look differently at how we do our streets. There was another presentation that I was going to show today called the 21st Century Street. The dialogue with respect to our infrastructure is so important right now, and cities like Cleveland and others better get ahead of it because it's going to smack us in the face if we don't rethink our funding models. Too often we tend to focus on making sure that potholes are removed and that our streets are just paved. The narrative now is changing where you have different types of modes of transportation that are being introduced, technology with 5G, all of that stuff is going to fill in our right-of-ways. And we have to really rethink as to how we divide up that street. And it's not just for automobiles anymore. And we don't even do any plans that don't, particularly with streetscape plans or any TLCI type of initiatives, everything has bicycle infrastructure in it. We don't even plan anymore without that being a consideration. So that in itself is a culture shift. And I think from a budgetary standpoint, if we can at least do a few catalytic projects a year while at the same time addressing the low-hanging fruit, like wherever you see striping on the street, that should be a given. That shouldn't be like, yay, an accomplishment. But when we talk about the things like midways and really trying to have dedicated protected facilities like the Detroit Superior Bridge, we got to kind of double down on trying to do more of those catalytic investments that really starts to change the culture. So for example, all the trail projects you saw, those are awesome, right? And the reason why I call that low-hanging fruit, not to negate them, but the thing that I think about is, if I live in a neighborhood, how do I get to the towpath trail? Do I have to drive a car to get to a trail? Or can I hop on my bike and get to a trail while traversing urban infrastructure? And what is that experience like, right? So that connectivity, I think, is really important so that these trail conversations can go beyond enthusiasts and it being a recreational situation, but also making sure that the utilitarian nature of alternative travel, such as bikes, et cetera, can happen more frequently and more and engage more people. And in order to engage more people, you have to be comfortable doing it. And I think that's the case for protected infrastructure, leading to a lot of the assets that Michelle and Brian that are doing really well.
One thing that we're seeing from a design perspective is the types of multimodal users. So it's not just the types of bicyclists anymore and the types of runners, walkers, et cetera. I'm just getting back from Copenhagen and Oslo, kind of what we used to think of as the multimodal central, right? Bike, bike, bike. It's no longer. That's one thing that we're seeing specifically with that Sandusky project. So we have scooters, we have motorized scooters, we have e-assisted bikes, we have normal bikes, we have road bikes, mountain bikes, everyone on the same space. And specifically over there, they don't fit anymore. That infrastructure, because there are so many different types of users, they're out of space. We specifically didn't bike in Copenhagen because it was so overcrowded with so many different types of, it's all great, no one's in a car, but it is so overcrowded. We're dealing with that here now. Do you allow segways? Do you allow e-scooters? Do you allow, a segway moves way slower than an actual bicyclist normally would. So is that something that we want to design for? Do you make it wider? Do you separate it? Do you talk about right-of-way? We go from needing 17 feet of right-of-way to, if you start segmenting walkers versus bikers versus e-scooters versus e-assisted bikes, I mean, the list is growing faster than I personally can keep up with. As far as what we're going to accommodate and allow, you start needing so much space where all of a sudden you get to Derek's area in Parma, dear Lord, we can't fit it. So, who do we accommodate when and how is a constant design challenge, and that's just something that you sit through with your clients and the stakeholders and through public involvement and understand who wants to be next to whom. Right. A lot of times residents feel very strongly about it, much more so. I think they're more open sometimes than designers are. Engineers tend to be very, rigid and concerned about safety, and yet when you hear very strongly from, the general public that they're comfortable being next to a Segway because it's actually less scary than a cyclist going 18 miles an hour, all of a sudden your design changes a little bit.
So I have a quick question, probably for Freddie and anyone else. A couple years ago, we talked about the hole in the donut. All the trails stop at the edge of downtown. But if you're on your bike and you got your family with you and you want to continue through downtown, there's not a lot of options. You either have to go on the street or you go on the sidewalk with all the pedestrians and so on. So we talked about, in fact, Michelle and Jeff had drawn some sketches of how this could look, and particularly across the street from the Q, which is now not the Q anymore, it's Rocket Mortgage Field or whatever. But anyway, just to wonder if anything else has been talked about in terms of potential funding down the road.
So there's proposals out there for different connections through the downtown.
Okay.
The one biggest connection that has to be made is connecting our downtown to our waterfront. So that's a big deal from the malls to the waterfront. And I think you have to do that by going beyond just the bridge. But I'm going to leave that conversation alone. The other thing, though, that I think is really important with, just say, the Detroit Superior Bridge, there's a concept out there that I really dig that connects the Detroit Superior Bridge and also loops around by the arena, takes advantage of the Lorraine Bridge and also the West 3rd Street Bridge. Now, this concept was introduced by Leadership Cleveland, I think, class of 2017. And I forget what is it called? Do you know? So what is it called? I'm blanking on what it's called, but it's really cool. And it takes advantage of a critical connection that links the Ohio City neighborhood into downtown. Okay. It leverages the arena, and it takes advantage of our existing investment at the Detroit Superior Bridge. One other thing I do want to highlight that you're starting to see a little bit more of too, particularly within downtown, if you notice when you go over the Detroit Superior Bridge and you get to the intersection in downtown, you see the traffic light that's designed specifically for cyclists. Okay. You also see the turn boxes. So those are indicators that the city is moving in that trajectory to make sure that the infrastructure is in and it's done correctly. People are uncomfortable with the pace, but, to credit Rob, Andy, and those guys, they're really trying to make sure that they can take the resources that are available to them and stretch them as far as they can in order to help improve our bicycle infrastructure. And we've moved up nationally in the rankings. So that's something to be proud of, So I think we just need to push a little harder and really try to get off a few more catalytic projects, and I think we'll be in good shape.
Terrific. Any other questions from the audience? Lenny? Wendy?
I wasn't going to say anything until the young lady mentioned the opportunity corridor, or I'm sorry, the health corridor, the health line. Brian, thank you for mentioning the Red Line Greenway, and Derek, I really appreciate your partnership. I think you're doing a great job on the Red Line Greenway. Freddie, I appreciated everyone's comments, but especially your comments about how streets weren't really built multimodal and how we should be doing that now. And I think all of you have been on a tour of the Red Line except Mark, and I'm happy to take you. But now, with the threat, you were saying how jealous you are, Derek, of how much land we have, but now the RTA is threatening to develop that land, and the whole easement for the trail was only 6.3 acres of what maybe could have been as many as 60 acres. And there's a group called Keep Our Greenway Green, and where it's a community-based effort to try to get RTA not to develop that land. And at a recent Duck Island Block Club, 38 of 40 people voted yes for the green space. We're not anti-development. There's tons of great development happening. We're all for that. I guess I'm here because I'm frustrated. You guys say all the right things. I wrote down all kinds of notes of creating that their place, making an experience. But what it's going to do is it's going to force what today is an urban forest and a wildlife habitat down into a 12-foot wide cattle chute. And by their own maps, it proves that. And the fact that there's 6.3 acres for a 2-mile trail also proves that, my point. And so we're still working on it. There's other angles we're taking, but it's frustrating when volunteers have spent thousands of hours down there to try to make this happen, and it seems like it's just the people of the local people fighting it. Although I have had 6 developers say that they believe it should not be developed also, among many other people. So I love advice. Thank you.
I mean, I don't know if I have advice, but I will say, we call our plan Cuyahoga Greenways, and we just presented it at a Greenway conference and other things, and people say that the Greenways kind of have a 3-prong. It's active transportation, recreation, and the third piece is usually like preservation or restoration, like what Derek does. But unfortunately nowadays, like that 3-prong, it's not equal. People focus most upon the transportation piece or the recreation piece. Like what you said, the actual preservation or the restoration kind of gets thrown out. And sometimes that could be, a lot of our projects are funded, through NOACA, so it's kind of a transportation focus. But I know personally I would like to see, especially when we talk about greenways and trails, a lot more of what Derek does and kind of things like that, where we focus a lot more not just on, hey, it's a trail and we're getting A to B and it's 10 feet wide and that's wide enough and that's it, that we're actually looking more at that sort of that third leg of the stool and that restoration, preservation piece, and saying, hey, that's not enough, let's go beyond it. Because a lot of people, they don't think a trail even qualifies as a greenway, if you go back into the history of landscape planning and things like that. So I mean, I understand your frustration, and I think it would be great for a lot of our plans if we could, do what Derek does, at a larger scale and even go beyond. But obviously, he'll tell us how difficult that is.
I think you should take it as a huge compliment. I think it's a huge compliment to all the effort that has gone in for all the volunteers, because it has become this space that before all the work that went in from the Rotary and all the people that have helped, even a couple years ago, no one would have wanted to develop it. And I know it's frustrating from that angle, but it's becoming such a cool spot that it is becoming so desirable that people want to live there. So even though it is a section that maybe could have been something else, I think it's also something that could be celebrated, because, oh my goodness, how awesome of a feeling that you're creating that there for that someone actually wants to live there against the Red Line Greenway. Right. So to me, I understand the frustration, and that's hard when you're very passionate about it, but it's really cool at the same time to see that this is something that people want to live in, want to have access to, because it's a good thing. Yes. The trail is a good thing.
And I can say, when I was working in Metro Parks in the Trust of Public Land, we did a lot of studies of how valuable the trails and greenways are. And the highest property values are usually contiguous to those facilities. People do want to live close to green space and trails. So I think we've kind of taken this conversation back to where we started. One more question, Dr. Kellogg. Yes.
Sorry, it's not really a question. I just have to say that this is one of the best sets of presentations I have seen, and I like the topic, but thank you, Jim, for putting this together. And what I want to remark about is these are the leaders of our community right now, and Jim has been here for a long time, and it's so wonderful to see all of you doing such remarkable work. So I want to thank you for what you're doing. And how many of you are Levin graduates?
Went to CSU.
Yeah, okay. And I take my students out to West Creek all the time, and we go to the Metro Park. So
Yeah.
this is such a tremendous resource, and the work that you all are doing, we want to take a little bit of credit for getting you started. And if I could, I want 2 more events I want to tell you about. May 23rd, Smoke on the Water. Be here. You'll see more about that soon. And Jim, May 6th, the Planning Studio will be presenting its final product about project in the West Creek neighborhood, which has some folks very interested. West Park, sorry. Very interested in connecting through trails and along Lorraine. So if you're available, please come. And all of you, please come. Thank you again. This was really great.
Well, thank you very much for attending today, and thanks to our panel. I think they did a terrific job. I agree with Dr. Kellogg, they just fantastic. So thanks again, and again, on behalf of Dean Anglin, we hope to have something again in an off year for the Greater Cleveland Trails Greenways Conference. Next year, it will be held probably next summer, I believe, right, Derek? And we do have a location yet? No, not yet. But we'll have it somewhere in Cuyahoga County or one of the surrounding counties. So thanks again, and enjoy the nice evening for the weather. Thanks.